All right.
Sorry, did you all hear that then?
Yeah.
Recording in progress. Yeah, we've started. Right.
Okay. Children's Crusade. You won't be surprised to know that a lot of the events around the Crusade are not very clear, and a great deal of mythology and exaggeration surrounds it. And even today, historians disagree about what exactly happened, or indeed whether it occurred at all. These are the early Crusades. There'd been 4 official Crusades to the Holy Land. There was also a Peasants' Crusade that started before the first one, which wasn't very successful. It didn't reach the Holy Land, and it's mainly famous for killing Jews along the way, because that's what they did in them days. The first official papal crusade was the 11th century, 1096 to 99, and it was that was the first one backed by the church, and European Christians ended up doing 8 crusades to not just to the Holy Land, but other places as well. So as you can see, the yellow bit at the bottom is where Islam had spread during the previous centuries, and it had gone into Spain, and at this time, round about the end of the 11th century, Europe was enjoying a period of economic strength, and the papacy had begun to assert its power more over the rulers of Europe. And so the idea was that the Catholic Church wanted to expand its power. So Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade in a bid to take the Holy Land. But as I said, there was one before that led by a guy called Peter the Hermit, but that wasn't an official crusade. So here they are, the 1096, the People's or Peasants' Crusade, like I say, slaughtered Jews, arrived at Constantinople. They think that the ruler at Constantinople just wanted to get rid of them, and he told them there's 2 theories, one that he just gave them directions to the wrong place, and the other that he actually informed the Turks that where they'd be. Anyway, they were destroyed at a battle in October 1096, just beyond Constantinople. The first official crusade was the same year that reclaimed Jerusalem, and it set up a number of Crusader states all along the Levant. The Levant is the area which is now Israel, Lebanon, that sort of area. The second crusade came about because the county of Edessa, which was one of the Crusader states, had fallen to the Turks, and it failed in its mission to retake it. Then you get the third crusade, which was the one led by Richard the Lionheart. This came about because they wanted to retake Jerusalem, which had been taken by the Muslim Seljuk Turks by Saladin, who was their leader at the time. So this is the one that's famous in this country because of its involvement with Richard the Lionheart. It failed in it to take Jerusalem, and that was it. And then the fourth crusade, which was a disaster really, another failure, but they ended up not going to the Holy Land. They actually went and sacked Constantinople, which was a Christian city at the time. So the less said about the Fourth Crusade, the better. So the motives behind these crusades. There's obviously religious zeal. That was a genuine thing. There's always been a lot of discussion and disagreement, but religious conviction was definitely one of the main motives. The other thing was pilgrimage. It had become a big thing to do in this time in the Middle Ages. Pilgrimages all over Europe, but especially to the Holy Land, which was usually okay. The Seljuk Turks usually were very tolerant of other religions at the time, but at the same time they were they were nibbling away at the Byzantine Empire, which was the remains of the East Roman Empire, were based in Constantinople, and they were asking for assistance from the Western European and Latin Christians, because they were Orthodox Christians. As I said, there was the increased power of the papacy, which gave them the wherewithal to call the Crusades. And another one was to divert the energies of lords and knights who spent a lot of time fighting amongst themselves and not doing very knightly things. So it was a way to get all these young knights and lords off doing something else, and promising them that indulgences, which is the next one. So the Crusaders themselves, there was again the religious zeal, the urge to reclaim the Holy Land or Jerusalem, or whichever bit was under the occupation of the Seljuk Turks. There was the indulgences, which meant that all your sins were forgiven if you took up the cross and went to the Holy Land. For the nobility, it meant an increase in power, wealth and influence. And for the peasants, freedom from serfdom and the chance of some plunder, hopefully, for them. And then there was those who just wanted to go and kill, pillage and rape, as you get in any group of any army or whatever. So all those things combined persuaded people to join the crusade. So after the failure of the Fourth Crusade, there was still a lot of crusading further in Europe, and there was a lot of frustration that they failed to retake Jerusalem. So in the winter of 1211, groups of clerics were conducting crusade recruiting drives in the Rhineland and across northern France. And these were intended to whip up enthusiasm for Pope Innocent III's new campaign. This time it wasn't a crusade to the Holy Land, but it was a crusade against the Cathars in southern France, who were seen as heretics, and also against the Muslim Caliphate that was in southern Spain. So we come to the traditional story of the Children's Crusade, which is the one that's probably more or less the one that I read when I was younger, and the one that it's probably in children's books today. So as you can see from the map, there was two crusades there. There was one from Cologne and one from France via Paris. And the first one, the French one, a shepherd boy, Stephen of Cloyes, had a vision from God this is the story, that Christ had appeared to him in the form of a pilgrim and had given him some letters along with instructions to deliver the letters to the King of France. So Stephen began preaching. Now, Stephen is a young shepherd boy, so obviously very, very articulate of that time. Now, the King of France was in Saint-Denis, just north of Paris. So Stephen led a growing band of children and impoverished adults on the road to Paris. And the idea was to hand the letters over to the king. By the time the group arrived at Saint-Denis, it had actually swelled to several thousand. And as the story goes, most of them were children. Stephen handed his letters to the king's advisors, but the king himself was unimpressed and refused to meet with Stephen. And then, undeterred, Stephen began to preach at the entrance of the Abbey of Saint-Denis, and he announced that he would lead his band of followers to the Holy Land to drive the Muslims out of Jerusalem and rescue the true cross. The true cross is allegedly carried by Crusaders and captured by Saladin at the end of the Fourth Crusade. So they all met in Vendôme, and there they set off on a crusade to the Holy Land. Now, the story is that they went all the way through France, and there was apparently 30,000 of them under 12 years of age. So according to one source, written in the 13th century, the children had their sights rather than go to fight the Cathars or the Spanish or the Muslims in Spain. They wanted, it was the true cross and the desire to retake the Holy Land. So after being blessed by local clergy, they set off to southern France, heading for Marseille. And Stephen told them all that when they got there, the sea would part for them, and they could then walk to the Holy Land. And with divine assistance, seize Jerusalem and recover the true cross. That summer apparently was one of the hottest for many years, and so a lot of children suffered and died on the way. And because there had been a recent drought, locals didn't want a gang of children all turning up, eating all the food and drinking what they've got left. So many died, many went home, and then the remaining reached Marseille, and they were actually welcomed by the people of Marseille, and they fed and watered them. But the bad news was the seas did not part on Stephen's command, and some children then left and made their way home. But apparently some others stayed, and according to the tradition, two local merchants called Hugh the Iron and William the Pig offered to supply 7 ships to carry the children to the Holy Land, free of charge. The children boarded the ships and sailed off, and unfortunately from then little was known of their fate. There is a tale of a priest who arrived in France from the Holy Land in 1230, 18 years later, and he claimed to have been part of the Children's Crusade and claimed that he had been aboard one of the 7 ships that had departed. He said that a few days into the journey, they were hit by a storm and 2 of the ships were wrecked off the coast of Sardinia. And all on board were lost. The 5 remaining ships sailed on, and then they found themselves surrounded by a fleet of Muslim vessels from Africa. And it turns out that the merchants had betrayed the children and had arranged to sell them into slavery. And they were taken to North Africa, where most of them were sold in slave markets and spent the rest of their lives as slaves. The young priest claimed that he, along with some of the more educated children, were shipped to Alexandria in Egypt, and a handful of them were purchased by the governor of Egypt, who was interested in learning Western languages. So they were okay. They were kept in comfortable conditions, and after many years, the priest was allowed his freedom. The priest claimed that only 700 of the children remained alive, and that many had been executed because they failed to convert to Islam. So the next story was that there was a second crusade. A second crusade originated in Germany. Now, some stories say this was a totally separate crusade, and some say that it was part of the French one and that the German children joined with the French ones. So the story goes, at about the same time that Stephen of Cloyes was preaching in France, another child, Nicholas from the Rhineland, who was also coincidentally a shepherd and a similar age, began preaching the crusade in Cologne in Germany. He seemed to be, like Stephen, quite eloquent and persuasive, and he also told his followers that the sea would part before him and he would lead them to the Holy Land. It seems that Nicholas, though, was, rather than an army and conquering the Holy Land, his idea was that they would go to the Middle East and convert the Muslims to Christianity by simply being by their purity, basically. So they set forward to march to the coast. Apparently, they split into two groups. The first group led by Nicholas and a second one. And they went across the Alps down to Italy. So going across the Alps is from Germany is pretty difficult. And many, again, are said to have died along the way. They made it to Genoa. And once there, the sea again failed to part. So many children ended up just settling in Genoa. It was like, well, they needed work. The Genoese thought there's a supply of cheap labour, so that's a lot of them stayed there. But apparently some followed Nicholas down the coast to Pisa, and because he claimed he accidentally picked the wrong spot, and the sea would part when they reached there, but again, it failed. And again, there's another story that there were some ships there that agreed to take some of the children to the Middle East, while Nicholas went to Rome to meet with the Pope, Pope Innocent III, who basically told him to go back home. So the other German expedition, they also travelled to Italy to reach the coastal town of Ancona. No parting of the seas, and some ended up again staying in Italy. And there is also a story, another version of the story, that some of them ended up travelling to Marseille and then became part of the other story and being betrayed, etc., by the merchants. So that's the traditional stories of the Crusade that went down through the ages. So what really happened. It is generally agreed that in the spring of 1212, the church were seeking to recruit people to go on crusade to fight Muslim Spain and the Cathars. And new groups of people started to emerge who were neither mercenaries or warriors. And these people, the 13th century chroniclers called them Pueri, P-U-E-R-I. So there's Stephen of Cloyes, we think. So Pueri, it's a Latin term that can mean children, or generally, or sometimes boys specifically. And that's why a lot of people dub this the Children's Crusade. But the other thing is that Pueri is also been noted by historians. It's also used as a social designation for poor landless peasants. So there's a debate going on about how many of the actual children on the Children's Crusade were children, and how many, or were they generally just children of poor landless peasants, or was there a lot of poor landless peasants on the marches? The Chronicon Universal Anonymi Landunius, that's it just means Leon World Chronicle, was written at the time by an unnamed monk in Leon in northern France. And the text that he wrote describes Stephen. It says, in the month of June, a certain Pueri named Stephen, a shepherd by profession from a village called Cloyes, used to claim that the Lord appeared to him in the guise of a poor pilgrim and accepted bread from him and entrusted him with letters to be carried to the King of Franks. So that's where the origin of the story comes from. Now, there's no reason to believe that's not true. It was actually written at the time. And since Cloyes is in the Diocese of Chartres, and that's one of the places that have been visited by Pope Innocent III and other preachers to build up support for the other Crusades. So the Leon Chronicle recounts that Stephen and a large band of Pueri set out for Paris to seek an audience with the French sovereign, Philip II. The Leon Chronicler noted the holy boy Stephen appeared as their master and leader. So Philip, as we know, didn't lend any support to Stephen. And there's no indication of whether he read the letters, whether the letters existed, or if they did exist, what they said. So there's no actual record of any of that. But the chronicler of Leon records that the king took the movement seriously enough to consult a learned group of churchmen known as the Paris Masters. His actions suggest that the king was fearful of a large presence of poor young people in the city, and that might lead to some unrest. So the Leon scribe wrote that, on their advice, the king commanded Stephen's followers to return to their homes, and Stephen's crusade ended as quickly as it began. So this, like I say, this chronicle was written just after these events are supposedly taken place. So most historians regard it credible, and that following the order of the king, Stephen's authority crumbled, and all the children just simply went home from then on. But interesting, Stephen and his followers later aroused more speculative accounts. Another chronicler, the Cistercian monk Alberic de Trois-Fontaines, he's the one who extended Stephen's story to the tragic end of leading his followers to Marseille and tricked by the merchant, etc. But most historians consider Alberic's writing questionable, to say the least. He includes a lot of the stuff that's in the Leon Chronicle, but the events in Marseille and North Africa and the merchants are not supported by any other sources of the era. So the best you can say is that his account is in the realm of hearsay. So it's generally agreed that the Nicholas of Cologne, his group did march through the Rhineland, proclaiming their desire to free the Holy Land. There is still confusion and doubt and speculation whether Stephen's crusade influenced Nicholas, or some of the French children went across to Germany, or both movements just arose spontaneously. So Nicholas, he again believed he'd received orders from God to travel to the Holy Land. And his followers reportedly numbered in the thousands, including men and women as well as youth. So they gathered in Cologne between Easter and Pentecost, and sources recorded that Nicholas and his followers carried a T-shaped Tau crosses. Those are the crosses, as you can see there, that's a Tau cross, and from the illustration you can see the crucifixion, and the crosses are the same. At this time, a lot of people believed that was how the crucifixion took place. And historical research has shown that at the time of the crucifixion in the Roman Empire did use those sort of crosses, not the more famous T-shaped ones. Not T-shaped, these are the T-shaped, the crossbar ones. So they carried these crosses, and they believed, as I said before, that their poverty, purity and innocence would prevail where knights and violence had happened, and they would convert the Muslim world to Christianity. Again, Nicholas, as it said before, claimed the sea would part from him. Apparently that is true for Nicholas, because he compared it to when Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt. And contemporary sources actually tracked his progress as they moved towards the Mediterranean. Now, the contemporary sources only talk about one group going, not two, as the other story goes. So they were registered, the presence was registered in the city of Speyer in southwestern Germany, and then across the Alps. That's where apparently the route they went. And many did die of hunger, exposure, fatigue. So many decided to return home, but they arrived at a place called Piacenza in northern Italy, and it's recorded that they got there on August 20th, 2012. So they'd walked over 400 miles in about a month. And then several thousand then travelled on another 100 miles to the port city of Genoa. So, as in the stories, the sea did not part, and it seems that the multitude then disbanded, and Nicholas' leadership seems to have ended, and his ultimate fate is unknown. That there was the tales later of some going to Marseille, others were going to Rome, but really there's no record of that. So despite not reaching the Holy Land, either in the chronicles of the time or in later versions, it did make a big impact on middle-aged culture, especially in the 13th century, just afterwards. It's been recorded by more than 50 chroniclers. Many of them were very anti the Crusade, mainly because it wasn't sanctioned by the Pope. But they still attracted a lot of attention. And there's a quote there from an Augustine monastery written in 1230, which starts off by saying about Nicholas's venture as a certain vain expedition. And you can see came to pass the Puri, the foolish person snatched up the sign of the cross without any discernment, motivation, more by curiosity than concern for their salvation. So we still don't know whether the Puri were children, peasants, a mixture of the two. The chroniclers were hostile in the main, and one of the reasons is, they think, is that this extreme piety carried too far by the young and the poor could lead to some breakdown in authority. And in a way, they were right, because there were later crusades from people outside of authority. There was the Shepherd's Crusade of 1251. That was led by a Hungarian, and it was linked at the time back to the Children's Crusade by one chronicler who claimed that the leader was now an older Stephen of 12, which is certainly untrue. And then later there was a second Shepherd's Crusade, which was aiming to go to the Iberian Peninsula to expel the Muslims again, but it ended up just rampaging through France, and it attacked castles, royal officials, priests, it attacked lepers, and mainly they attacked Jews. So that's it. So it looks like get this right. So that's it.